But I know since some of you might not be able to be here tomorrow, we're looking at the book of Esther today. Esther, the events of Esther, they are dated quite some time ago. They're dated to the reign of, in the scriptures, many of your translations will call him Ahasuerus. Xerxes may be a more popular name. He's in Persia. He ruled from about 586 BC to 465. And so that's roughly the time period that these events would be taking place. And to us, that sounds like it's a really long time ago. But it's really not. Because things really haven't changed all that much. The situation of the Jewish people today, it's amazing how much the world today is similar to the days that were there during the book of Esther, during the events that we'll be celebrating. And I'm just going to run through a few things, and I don't know if this is going to be a whole long message or not, but it depends on how much more talkative I get, so it should be less than 3 hours. We'll see about that. But, you look at how things are similar. You look at Haman, the Agagite, who basically we read about that passage earlier, the events with King Saul, where he was supposed to wipe out and obey the Lord and wipe out the Amalekites. Well, somebody survived, where descendants of Agag made it. And they were holding on to that history, holding on to that family grudge against the Jewish people for centuries, and sought to destroy them. All right, you see that in chapter 3, verse 6. In Haman's interaction with Mordecai, it was repugnant in his eyes to lay hands on Mordecai alone. If you remember from the account, Mordecai was not willing to bow down before Haman. And it wasn't enough to just get him. It's like this was the chance. This was the moment. This was the opportunity for him to avenge his whole family and that whole history. He says they had told him the identity of Mordecai's people, the Jewish people. And so Haman sought to destroy not just Mordecai, but all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So he had been holding on, he had been looking for the opportunity for a moment where he could fulfill all that had been passed on to him, to avenge his ancestors. And today, we have Hamas, who is holding a grudge against the Jews, and we have watched them in our own day, in our own time, who seeking to destroy the Jewish people. When you think about Haman and those aligned with him were strategically placed in positions of power and influence within governments that would allow him to blame the Jews for all the problems of Persia, problems that were created that he could direct the attention on and say, man, if they were not here at all, boy, the world would be such a better place. He would be able to write even legislation to enforce that idea. I mean, is that still happening in our day, where everything is the fault of the Jews? Aren't there stuff on the internet, conspiracies, all kind of things? Over and over and over again, it's all there. Haman had the same thing in his day. I can't imagine how it would have been if they had social media and the internet for Haman to accomplish what he did. But he says, Haman then said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose laws differ from those of every other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's interest to tolerate them. They're causing trouble. They're causing problems. All those things that are affecting us, that are problems, that are things not happening right, it's their fault. And so if it pleases the king, let an edict be written to destroy them. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry out this business to put it into the king's treasuries. So he's trying to even say, I'm going to make it worth your while if we can just get rid of this problem. And again, it's not much different than today. Hamas has friends and allies that are strategically placed in powerful and influential positions within various governments, various bodies that are blaming the Jews for the conflict, and they direct money, they direct aid, they direct legislation. They're the ones, it's Israel, it's Netanyahu, it's all of those. Those are the ones that continually are blaming the Jews for why there's no ceasefire yet. Not Hamas, not the fact that they're holding on to hostages, not the ones that are starting this conflict. You see the world superpower of its day, Persia, facilitating that destruction because its ruler listens to the lies that Haman is giving their way. And today, we have superpowers, whether it be the UN, the United Nations, or the United States, that are facilitating the destruction of Israel because they're listening to the lies that Hamas is putting out. It's very disturbing to hear government officials from our country just parroting back all of the statements and all the phrases and all the statistics and all the things that come straight out of Hamas. Y'all notice that? That's what is happening. They're listening to a false death toll. They're watching staged videos and various other kinds of lies. In Esther's day, they had different reactions. People had different reactions within the Persian kingdom by the edict against the Jews. Some were like, man, what's going on with all this stuff? Who do I believe? How do I understand all this stuff? Some were confused. Others were like, yeah, heck yeah. Let's get on board that train. They would rise up wherever they were to join the fight to destroy the Jewish people. Chapter 3, verse 13, it says, dispatches were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces, stating to destroy, slay, and annihilate all the Jews, from the youth to the elderly, both little children and women, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. And a copy of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to all people so that they would be ready for that day. You're talking months in advance. The couriers went out hurriedly with the king's command, and the edict was issued in the palace in Shushan. The king and Haman then sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded. They couldn't make sense of what is going on. And like I said, again, today, some are reacting to all the different events. Some are reacting to the speeches and declarations and all the things said against the Jews. Some of them are confused by it. They're like, what are you people talking about? Some of them are hesitating. They don't know who to believe. So there's this lack of willingness to state one way or the other. There's this lack of moral clarity. You even see that within churches and denominations that are dividing over their support, over which side to support. People who are claiming the name of Christ and the name of Messiah, that it's like, man, we should be on these people's side. Well, we don't know who to believe. While others, they hear what's happening out there in the world today, and they're preparing themselves to join in. Join in the fight against the Jews and anyone who supports them. You're seeing increasing attacks and anti-Semitism, not just over there around the world in the Middle East. You're seeing it in Europe, you're seeing it in England, and you're seeing it here. How many of y'all saw the video of those that were marching just in Nashville a few weeks ago? Did y'all see that? Yeah. Just a few weeks ago, down the streets of Nashville was a group that was supporting annihilating the Jewish people. That's why the rise in anti-Semitism around the world in America is so great. That's why whole political parties are bowing to the friends and allies of Hamas. And so the Jewish people back then had to defend themselves from this coordinated effort, this coordinated attack, and they're having to do that again today. The strategy of the enemy has never changed. Satan wants to wipe out and destroy the Jewish people, because if he can destroy them and wipe them out, then that means that God has broken his promise. They can make God into a liar. If Satan can destroy the Jewish people, then that means, back in the days of Esther, that means Messiah would never be born in the future, that God would break his covenant that he made. And that effort has not changed. It's continuing on in our lifetime, and we are seeing events that strongly parallel elements of this account. We need to pray that other elements within the book of Esther also parallel our day. In one respect, we need more people like Mordecai. This didn't work out the way I wanted it to. It says, he is from a family of survivors. And we need to think of ourselves as, we need to be people like that. It says, there was a Jewish man in Shushan Palace whose name was Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives that had been carried away with the king Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had taken away. So he had been surviving some pretty traumatic events. His family had survived some pretty traumatic events with the exile all the way back in Nebuchadnezzar's day, with the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. We need more people like Mordecai. Hey, it took off all of my changes. Oh well, I'll have to get over it, I guess, more than y'all. But he's a generous man. We need more people like him. It talked about him in chapter 2, verse 7, that he had raised Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter. For she had neither father nor mother. The girl was attractive, had a beautiful figure. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her to him as his own daughter. In our day, we're going to need to be people more like that. That has a generosity, a willingness to care for those that are in need, because not everybody's going to survive. Not everybody survived, and not everybody has a happy ending in this world, do we? And when there was somebody that was in need, he was willing to step up. He was willing to take her under his care and protect her, educate her, help her to navigate through this world. He was also a very savvy man. He was somebody who knew the times. He knew the issues that were going on. He knew that there were problems. Even before all of the edicts and all of those things, he knew enough to give her warning. Esther had not disclosed her people or her lineage because Mordecai had commanded her not to make them known. So again, he suspected things were not going to go as well as you would like. And he gave her counsel. He gave her good counsel, godly counsel. That's the kind of people we need to be. We need to be aware of what's happening around us in this world. We need to have a mind that is paying attention to things and see where the trends are going and see where the problems are going to be. And even if you don't see them manifest openly, directly yet, it's like, well, you know what? I kind of suspect it's going to go in this direction. So let me take a few steps just to make sure that if this happens, then I have some protection. I have some preparation for that. So he is savvy. He is knowing the times that he is living in. He's also a man who's willing to pay attention and save life. In the course of doing his job, in the course of living, that didn't mean that he ignored everything else that was going on. Because in those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told it to Queen Esther. And Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the matter was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on a gallows, and it was then written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. You would think with all that had been going on, with all of the taking of Esther and all the different policies that the king had, do you think Mordecai liked King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, all that much? Do you think he agreed with him politically? Do you think he voted for him? Any of those things? No. He probably didn't like him very much. And yet, when he found out that there was something about to go down, when he found out that there was somebody going to make an attempt on his life, even though he didn't like him, even though he didn't agree with him, even though that guy didn't believe the same things that he did, he still went forward and saved his life. There'll be times when, well, we are told and we are instructed to pray for those who persecute us, right? We're told to even pray for the leaders of the nation, even of the country, so even of the president. We're supposed to be praying for them, aren't we? Whether you like them or not, whether you voted for them or not, right? Because ultimately you want them to make good and godly decisions, right? And if nobody's praying for them, nobody's interceding on their behalf, then the only influence that they're going to have is not of God. So being willing to pay attention, be willing to save life. He's also somebody that is a man of conviction. He was one that refused to kneel before the authority that had been put up there because he knew exactly who that guy was. He knew exactly who Haman was. It says, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded it. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay him honor. And when Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying him honor, Haman was filled with rage. And that's right before that passage where he says, I don't want to kill just Mordecai, I want to wipe them all out. Because he knew who Haman was. He knew that this person that was an official of the king was not somebody to bow down before. Have we been asked to bow down before officials and basically do anything and everything that they say in the last few years? There been pressure to do that? Yeah, there has. Don't think for yourself. Just obey and comply to everything, every edict, every demand that we make of you. Comply. And there are times when it's appropriate not to comply. We have to be people of conviction. And even in knowing that, Mordecai knew that there was, if I do this, there's probably going to be some consequences. And if you're going to stand on your conviction, if you're going to refuse to kneel, then you might have to pay a price for it. He's also a man of prayer and fasting, because when Mordecai learned all that was done, all that the edicts included, he says he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, he went out into the middle of the city, crying out in a loud and bitter voice. He knew that things were bad. When he called out to God, he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one could enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the king's edict and law came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting weeping and wailing, many putting on sackcloth and ashes. So when we see things go from maybe bad to worse, there's nothing wrong with crying out to God, without mourning, without seeking Him, with all your heart, and to be that kind of person. We need more people like him in the days ahead. Even a man of insight and counsel. Once again, chapter 4, verse 13, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther with this answer. Do not think in your soul that you will escape. This is where she was wondering. It was like, well, maybe if I just don't say anything, maybe if I just keep my mouth shut and quiet and just go along, and it'll just kind of smooth over. It can't really be that bad. Maybe I'll escape. Maybe I'll get by. But don't think in your soul that you will escape in the king's household more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. Because he believed the promise. He believed the covenant. Mordecai did. He believed wholeheartedly that God's not going to break his promise. That's why he could say that. But you and your father's house will perish. And he says, who knows whether you have attained royal status for such a time as this, that you are put in the right place at the right time, because he put you there to do something. Each of us has to ask that question, don't we? Where are we? What can we accomplish here in this place, in this moment? We need to have that kind of spiritual insight and counsel. He was also a man who had a plan to defend his people. Chapter 8. So the king's scribes were called at that time, and on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, so all the events were supposed to take place in the 12th month, so we're talking 7-8 months beforehand, right? On the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to all the Jews. The king granted the right for the Jews, in verse 11, in every city to assemble themselves and to protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any army of any people or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder their possessions. That was all the edict and plan that Mordecai had prepared in response to the things that happened in the course of the book. They had to be willing to defend their people. And in all these things, he was also willing to step up when the time came. It says in chapter 9, even all the administrators of the provinces, the officers and governors, those doing business for the king, helped the Jews, for the dread of Mordecai had fallen upon them. Mordecai was prominent at the palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. The man Mordecai was growing ever more powerful. In being willing to have insight and counsel, of having a plan and doing all of these types of things, when the moment came, God was willing to honor that and respond to that. He stepped up into his moment, and his people were saved because of it. You look at, we need people more like Esther. Now, all of a sudden it's working. She herself was wise in how she responded to things. When she was brought into the situation, not of her choosing, not of her preference, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, advised. And Esther won the favor in the eyes of all who saw her. It's a matter of who knows who the king is, who knows what his preferences are, who knows what he likes, what he doesn't like, and you find out what that is and what he suggests and go with that. Verse 20, again, she was still wise enough to know to obey the counsel that had been given to her. Esther had not yet made known her lineage or her people. Just as Mordecai had told her, Esther continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. She was also very brave. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai when he told her that, hey, look, you're not going to survive if you don't do anything. You're not going to make it. You may think you're safe up there, but you're really not. So she says, go and gather together all the Jews who are in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast in the same way. Afterwards I will go into the king, even though it is not according to the law. And so if I perish, I perish. She knew she was taking her life, putting it at risk. And there's a lot of things that we're going to have to risk in the days ahead. She also was willing to use the influence that she had. On the third day, it says Esther put on her royal apparel after her prayer and fasting. She put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. And so the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king to her, what is it, Queen Esther? Whatever you request, even as much as half the kingdom, it will be given to you. She was willing to risk her life. She was willing to step forward, to step up into that moment as well, and then make the request in order to change the situation that was threatening not just her, not just her family, but every single one of her people. She's a woman who knows the danger and is still willing to act. That's the courage. She says, this is my petition. Spare the life of my people. This is my request. She's not hiding these things anymore. For we have been sold, and my people for destruction. For I and my people for destruction, slaughter, and annihilation. Got the wrong verses on here. This is also chapter 7, but she knows the danger, and she knows exactly what she's going in, and she is acting on behalf of them. And when the king responds, when he finds out that, well, wait a second, this is not what I was looking for. This is not what I wanted to happen. When he's starting to see through the lies that he had been told, and realize that maybe I did something I shouldn't have done. She is not afraid also to be a woman of justice. That should be also chapter 7. King Ahasuerus responded to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is the man that presumed to do this? His eyes are starting to open. And Esther replied, the man, the adversary and foe, is this wicked Haman. And Haman was terrified before the king and queen. When the moment came, this is part of our problem, part of our trouble at our time. We don't like to hold anybody accountable for the things that they've done. You have all of these decisions that government officials have been making in the last few years that have ruined people's lives, ruined people's business, ruined and killed people, made them die alone in different places. Who's being held accountable for those things? Nobody. Nobody. And it's as if everybody is just wanting to, well, let's just move on and let everything go, and we'll stop talking about it, and we'll stop worrying about it, and we'll just forget all about it. and then those that made those decisions that got everybody into the mess in the first place, nothing ever happens to them. Can you imagine what this would be like if Esther had gone in there and told, the king everything that was happening, even if her family and her people were saved, but she didn't point the finger and say, "Oh, by the way, it's that guy sitting right there. It was Haman." What if she never did that? What do you think would happen if Haman was able to just go on and stay in the position that he had without any accountability, without any justice? Do you think he'd be like, "Whew, man, I'm never going to mess with those people again"? Or do you think he'd be like, "Wow, man, I dodged a bullet. I better make sure I get him next time. I better not leave any moment or opportunity. Better not put it off for 8, 9, 10 months like we did this time." If there is no accountability with these things, then somebody like Haman is going to do it again. And that's the situation that we're in. If we don't hold people accountable for what they have done and the decisions and the you could, if I'm generous to say, errors, then they'll do it again. And we'll just be right back at the same position over and over again. So we need more of that in our day, just like in this day. Another thing that we need is we need to be seeking and praying and hoping for more favor with the world leaders, just like she was having back then, like it was here in the book of Esther. And part of that means being reminded of the accomplishments that this people had done, that Mordecai had done. In chapter 6, at a time when the king was having trouble sleeping, it was found recorded there that Mordecai had revealed that Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the door, had conspired to kill the king, King Ahasuerus. And the king asked, "What honor or recognition has been shown to Mordecai for this?" And he found out nothing. Nothing had been done. So he needed to be reminded of the contribution that Mordecai had made. And when he was reminded of that, then he was willing to honor him. We're going to need more. The Jewish people need to be more. The world needs to be reminded of the contribution that they have made to this world, to our lives, to our future, to our salvation. The world needs to be reminded of all of that. They also need to be reminded, they need to be willing, they need to seek and pray for that they would hear the situation. Hear the situation of what is really going on. In chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "So the king and Haman came to dine with Queen Esther." This is what she had asked them to do, to come so she could present her case before him. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked Esther again, "Whatever your request, even as much as half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." So we need our world leaders to be willing to hear, to be willing to consider, to be willing to respond to all of these things, and to hear it without the lies. We also need to pray and seek that to reverse essentially the enemy's position, the upper hand that they may have. In chapter 6, again, it says, "The king said to Haman, 'Go quickly.'" This is that moment where you're finally remembering when, did we ever do anything for Mordecai who saved my life? And he's like, "No, we never did anything." Y'all remember this moment? This is one of the funniest moments in the whole account. Haman comes strolling in and is ready to speed up the process, but the king asks him, "Hey, what should be done for somebody who's pleased the king?" And he's like, "Well, who could have pleased the king more than me? So what's my greatest desire? What's my greatest wish? What would I love to have happen for me?" And he laid out his request. And the king said to Haman, "Go quickly and take the robe and the horse, just as you suggested, for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything that you recommended. And so Haman took the robe and the horse, robed Mordecai, and paraded him through the city streets, proclaiming, "This is what is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor." The very thing, the very person that he hated the most, he had to parade in front of him. Another example of that reversal happens in chapter 7. It says, Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, this is after Esther had pointed the finger and said, "It's that man right there." One of the eunuchs attending the king said, "Look, a gallows 50 cubits high is standing next to Haman's own house." Haman himself made it for Mordecai, so to hang Mordecai on it, who spoke good on behalf of the king. The king said, "Hang him on it." And so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. There's a lot of intentions. There's a lot of evil that is intended for the Jewish people, that people have been planning for some time, and we need to see that these things get reversed and turned around. Again, it happened in chapter 9, same thing. Seek the reversal for what the enemy wants to do. He says, "On that day the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but contrary to the expectations, the Jews gained the upper hand over those that hated them. Jews assembled in their cities throughout all their provinces of King Ahasuerus in order to lay hands on those seeking their harm, but no one was able to stand against them, for fear of them had fallen on all the peoples." It goes on. It says, "On that day," well, I got it 2 in a row. Verse 24. It's another reversal. "For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the poor, that is the lot, to ruin and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he issued a written edict that the wicked scheme of Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows." Again, there's been a lot of plans that have been made, and we need to be seeking that these things get turned around. We need to be seeking in our life in this world today, as much as it was in the days of Purim, for more victory, revival, and celebration. They need to have the right to defend and finish themselves. That's part of the debate that's going on right now. No, you guys need to stop. You guys need to leave Hamas in power. Y'all have been hearing all that kind of stuff. Don't go in there. Don't finish the job. But if they do that, they're just going to have to do it all over again at another time. It says, "The king granted the right for the Jews in every city to assemble themselves and to protect themselves." Again, does this sound like today? "To destroy, kill, and annihilate any army of any people or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder their possessions." Goes on in chapter 9. It says, "The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did whatever they wished to those who hated them. In the citadel at Shushan, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people." Verse 16, "Meanwhile, the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered together to protect themselves and to get relief from their enemies, and they killed 75,000 of their enemies." Those are numbers even greater than what Hamas is suggesting is happening today. But they need to have that right to defend themselves and to finish those that are attacking them and wanting to destroy them. We also need the reversal of the world leaders and those that are maybe not their allies at this point. We need to pray and seek and hope that those opinions would change. Chapter 9, verse 3 says, "Even all the administrators of the provinces, the officers and governors, and those doing business for the king helped the Jews." for the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. We need more of that. We need to seek more of that in our day, that they don't know where they are, if they don't know what position to take, if they don't know who to believe, we need to be seeking and praying that they would change and support Mordecai, support the Jewish people. And then with all of that, this victory and this celebration, we need more of the revival that comes about from it. Chapter 8, it says, throughout every province and throughout every city, wherever the king's edict and his law went, the Jews had gladness and joy, in a strange turn of events. Banquets and holidays, and many peoples of the land even became Jews because the fear of the Jews had overcome them. So more and more people said, I want to join in with that people. The ones who had been the target are now the ones who are seeing the victory. And as they became Jewish people, as they became and were welcomed into this community, who did they begin to hear about? Wouldn't they hear about the hope of the covenants? Would they not begin to hear about the hope of the Messiah that is to come? And have an expectation and a waiting for him. It goes on in chapter 9, verse 20. In this revival and this growth, it says, Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, urging them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year. And as the days when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into celebration, these were to be days of feasting, of celebration, and sending presents of food to one another and giving gifts to the poor. This is what tomorrow is supposed to be all about. That recognition of God's deliverance. And that's what we need to hope for and pray for, that we see in our own day. Verse 27 says, the Jews established and took upon themselves, upon their descendants, and upon all who joined with them, that they would commemorate these 2 days in the way prescribed and at the appointed time every year. Verse 28, these days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family and in every province and in every city. These days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor their remembrance perish from their descendants. It's an important day. It's an important remembrance and recognition of great miracles that God has done in the past, and he is still capable and able to do in our day. Amen? He is still able to do that. So we need to pray for more people, that we would be people like Mordecai and Esther, that we would be a people of conviction, of courage, of insight and influence, that we would have the favor of the world leaders, especially in the conflict that we see in our day, that they would be willing to hear and be favorable and even reverse what the enemy intends to do, and that so that we could see that victory, that we could see that people more and more wanting to come and join themselves to be a part of this people, to celebrate so they can defend themselves, to finish those that are attacking them, but celebrate the victories that God provides. So much of the book of Esther, like I said, is happening again in our day. And we can be a part of those things, or we can be mindful, watchful, hopeful in all of them. And in the same sense that we wonder, how is God going to deliver his people in our day? How can we be sure and participate in it? How can we be sure and remember it for the days in the future? Because you never know what God may do in our day that people in generations to come may talk about. And what kind of people were we in that time?